And good. And now I'm going to start letting people in. Thank you, John. See you later. Bye.
Bye.
Admit. iPhone, I don't know who that is. And Beryl is out there.
And Carl, whom I know.
Oh, that's a friend of yours. Great.
Hi, Carl. Guess he can't hear me.
He should be able to hear you at this point.
No, I guess it's, he has it,
He's muted.
yeah.
Hi, Beryl. It's been a while. I don't know who iPhone is. So
No.
we'll see. But let's, and I can mute all if we need, if this background noise gets too bad.
It's usually a good idea to do that, I think, because people have phones ring and things like that. Dogs bark, babies cry,
You got it. Welcome,
Hey, Carl.
Carl.
Hello.
Welcome to Shomray.
Hi there. Hi there.
Hi.
We typically start, we're early now, and this is a late arriving crowd, so we usually don't start till 8:05.
Okay.
This is a good time to clear your throat and tell a joke.
Have a drink of water.
Mhm. iPhone, can you tell us who you are? I don't know who this is.
Mhm.
Yeah. We'll find out soon enough.
Carl, I saw that you mentioned the talk and the thing you do for the right group in the rundown. I don't think you can hear me. Can you hear me,
I
Carl?
can hear you. Yeah, I can
Yeah.
hear you.
So I see that you mentioned the talk and the coming attractions that you do for the right group.
Which talk? This one? Yours?
Yeah,
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
that was nice.
You
that
welcome.
did it.
Send me $100 and we'll be your friends again.
Thank
Can we
you.
bargain?
We appreciate it too.
Okay. You're very welcome.
Okay, hang on. I have to pay attention to who's in the waiting room. Linda's coming in. Hi, Linda. Imagine we'll be seeing Rita, Miriam, since she was your agent to bring us.
She's my Asian. If she's free, she's very busy often.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hi, Carol. It's good to see you. How are you?
Recovering from 22 robocalls in the space of 4.5 hours this afternoon.
Oh my God. Here's Rita Singa.
Ah. Beryl, you got down there okay? You're muted.
I realized that after I said, yep. And everything is normal. There's stuff to do that I didn't plan to do.
Isn't that always the case? Hi, Rita.
Rita. Whoa, something going on over here. Oh. Was it something we said? Rita's leaving.
No,
I'm
there was-
kidding.
it was like flashing all over the place.
Yeah, I know. Hi, Ken.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Be down in a few minutes. She's working.
Okay. Rita, we're glad to see you. Because we decided you were the agent. You were Miriam's agent.
So you can have a commission. You can have half of nothing.
That's right. Oh, there's my husband. Will you mute?
I am your.
No, you're not. There you are.
Oh, I know it's on.
My husband just came on.
Okay, David, did Shirley tell you I had regards for you from Charlotte Lopita at the
I didn't tell.
preschool? At the preschool. I met her a few weeks ago when I was dropping my upstairs, my 5-year-old upstairs neighbor off for
Right.
before care.
He just left. He and I were in the same room, and so there was an echo.
Yeah.
So I just sent him away. There he is.
Okay. That's when you discover it's a small world.
It is funny.
Yeah.
Carolyn is who you met.
I'm sorry, what?
Was it Carolyn?
Could have been Carolyn, but David hired her.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. A few more minutes and we will resume at Nourish.
Okay.
It's Natalie. Hey, Natalie.
If we go off screen, it's because we're making dinner. It's not as if we're not listening, to let you know.
Okay.
Thank you for the warning.
Well, no, Ken, what are you making?
We're having fish from yesterday, and actually Judy wants me to make rice, which could be a problem, even though it's packaged. And that's it. Some vegetables from yesterday too. So we'll have to find a package of rice now.
But at least, but now that you're retired, Ken, you're not having dinner at 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock at night.
Thank God. It's actually more, I mean, with Judy, I would be picking up Judy between 10 and 11 o'clock. She would come home and then start making dinner. So now that she's kind of, let's say, semi-retired.
Yeah.
At least we're
I
having dinner.
understand that.
Yeah, right.
And that state of being. Okay, we'll wait a few more minutes now.
Okay.
It's 8 o'clock. And then I'm going to introduce our speaker. I'm trying to keep an eye on the waiting room, as we say. Yeah. It's been a while. We're out of practice. Here's Sarita. Okay. So this is like opening night, Miriam, because we haven't done this for a while. And so you are our opening speaker for 2023.
Okay.
Yeah, kind of exciting.
What was
Rita,
your
there's
last speaker?
something.
What was your last speaker in 2020?
Oh, his name was Josh. Somebody help me here. He wrote the book about the family Roe, another journalist.
It was Josh Prager.
Prager, thank you. Thank you. That he was our last speaker at the end of 22. And he spent 11 years searching for and finding all of the children of Jane Roe. She was called Jane Roe, wasn't she?
Yeah, I just forgot what her name.
And it was a longitudinal study of the family and how they came up, and it was amazing.
Hmm.
So,
What do you mean by all of the children? She had so many children?
yes, she did.
Hmm.
Yes, she did.
The
And-
person who was actually Jane Roe, I think her name was Norma McCorvey, something like that.
Right. That's right. Exactly right.
And
And
she later turned against Roe,
mhm,
became an
Mhm.
opponent.
she had a very challenging upbringing,
I see.
very challenging. All right. Well, I'm going to start this, and I want to welcome you all back to At Nourish. It's been a while. We've been on hiatus. It was Christmas. I had COVID. I could make up 100 different excuses, but I'm glad we're starting up again. And I want to introduce tonight's speaker, and Miriam Schneir, who comes to us via Rita Singer. I keep saying Rita gets the agent's fee for this. Miriam is a noted feminist scholar, and she has edited 2 anthologies on women's history. One is Feminism, the Essential Historical Writings of Feminism in Our Time. And she has written for Ms. Magazine, The Nation, New York Times Magazine, and other publications. Her most recent book, self-published last year, is Before Feminism, The History of an Idea Without a Name. I love that. I know you're here to talk to us about the Rosenbergs, but if we have a little time, we should sneak in a little bit feminism.
We always have feminism. It's always there.
It's always there. Miriam, it's a pleasure to have you join us. And what I said to Miriam is, if you put your questions in the chat, or if you just raise your hand, I'll make a note and we'll give Miriam a little time to talk, and then we'll pause for questions. I don't want to break her train. So Miriam, to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Shirley. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you, Rita, for putting my name forward. And thank you for the nice introduction also. I'm glad to see so many of you here to talk about the Rosenberg case. And as it happens, this year is an anniversary. It's 70 years since the executions of Julius Rosenberg and Ethel Rosenberg. And it's kind of remarkable when you stop to think about it, that the Rosenberg case, after 7 decades, is still part of the national conversation. And over the years, I've kept a folder going, which I call the Rosenberg case in the media. And around the mid-90s, it was such a fat folder, I had to break it into 2 folders. And now again, it's full. Just last year, there were 2 books published. One, a biography of Ethel Rosenberg, which was very well received and took the point of view that she was should not have been executed and was not a spy. And the other was a novel by Francine Prose, where the Rosenberg case features as an important part of the plot of the novel. So I think that we can say after all this time that the case is one of those milestone cases in American history that will probably live on. And it kind of joins the ranks of other famous cases. For instance, the Sacco-Vanzetti case, the Mooney Billings frame up, there were union leaders, the Scottsboro so-called boys in Alabama, another one. Oh, of course, the Leopold Loeb case, which we all, read about. And I think there's every chance that the George Floyd case will join this not illustrious group, or shameful group, really, when it comes to American history. So the Rosenberg case is the quintessential trial of Cold War, atomic age America. And I think we all know about it from that reason. And so I know that some of you, like me, lived through the era of the Rosenberg case and perhaps remember it. And for others, maybe it's ancient history that you know very little about. But bear with me, I'm going to review some of the essential background information about the case. So first, I think the most important thing to know about it is that the crime that the Rosenbergs were alleged to have committed was of extraordinary magnitude. And I'm going to read to you a very brief excerpt from what the U.S. attorney had to say in his opening speech to the jury. He said the Rosenbergs gave the Soviet Union the secret of the atomic bomb, quote, "This one weapon that may well hold the key to the survival of this nation and means the peace of the world." And the judge said in his sentencing speech, which has become rather notorious for its extremism, that the Rosenbergs' crime was worse than murder. Quote, "I believe your conduct in putting into the hands of the Russians the A-bomb has already caused the communist aggression in Korea, with the resultant casualties exceeding 50,000. By your betrayal, you have undoubtedly altered the course of history." And then he said that their crime was worse than murder. So who were the Rosenbergs? Julius Rosenberg, Ethel Greenglass. They were born to immigrant Jewish parents on the Lower East Side. They were raised in tenement apartments, and they attended the New York City public schools. Julius came from a rather religious family. He studied Hebrew. He took classes in a Jewish high school, and he was bar mitzvahed. After high school, Ethel went to work in the garment industry, not doing garment work. She did clerical work. She was a bookkeeper, something like that. And Julius entered CCNY, the City College of New York, which at that time was free to residents of New York City. Both of them came of age during the Depression, and this was a very formative event in their lives. They both turned to radical left politics. And at some point, Julius joined the Communist Party, and very, very likely Ethel did also. So Julius graduated from CCNY with a degree in electrical engineering, and they were married in an Orthodox Jewish ceremony in 1939. During World War II, Julius got a job with the Army Signal Corps at Fort Monmouth, New Jersey. And they were able to rent a 3-room apartment in Knickerbocker Village, which was I think it was partly subsidized, at least by the city, in downtown Manhattan. It was located like between the Brooklyn Bridge and the Manhattan Bridge, in that area. And they had 2 children. In 1945, Julius was fired from his job as a security risk. They probably raided Communist Party headquarters and got membership cards and discovered he was a member of the party and fired him. They were arrested. Oh, then he opened a little machine shop down in downtown Manhattan and barely eked out a living in there. So they were arrested in the summer of 1950, in Julius in July and Ethel in August. And he was 32 at the time, and she was 35. Their son Michael was 7, and Robbie was 3. So it was not a good time for defendants who were accused of passing information to the Russians. And I'm going to turn now to say a few things about the political atmosphere of the 50s. The first atomic explosion by the Russians took place in 1949, just a year before the arrest And Americans were shocked and frightened that we had lost our atomic monopoly. Most of us had been led to believe that we would have that monopoly for many years. A lot of scientists knew that wasn't the case, but it was a big shock when it happened, and it generated a lot of fear of atomic annihilation, really. So, as often happens when people are terrified, they do stupid things. And so we had these, and I remember this myself in school, these duck and cover drills where you'd have to, like, you know, climb under your desk when the teacher said duck and cover, and you covered your head with your arms as though that was going to protect you from an atomic explosion, you know. And many people dug fallout shelters in their backyards. So in suburban backyards had actual fallout shelters, which were stocked and available in case of an atomic explosion. And then, you know, assuming you survived the initial shock of the explosion, you could then go into your fallout shelter and avoid the radioactive rain that would be raining death on us all. Well, less amusingly, the fear gave rise to a determination to root out communists from any positions of influence or importance in American life. And there were thousands, well, maybe thousands is too great, maybe hundreds of federal and state un-American activities committees. And they held public hearings at which alleged communists or so-called fellow travelers, which in the crude language of the period, fellow travelers meant anyone who had either known communists or been associated with communists or belonged to organizations that were considered communist organizations. And thousands of public school teachers, college professors, writers, publishers, editors, and employees of federal, state, and local governments lost their jobs, were denounced in the press, lost their reputations, and lost their livelihoods. There was generated an attorney general's list, and this list was allegedly of people who, of organizations that advocated the overthrow of the government by force and violence. And anyone who belonged to one of these organizations or who had signed a petition that advocated something that was connected with one of these organizations or with a candidate who was a far left candidate was likely also to find their names in the newspapers or on the radio and to be considered a security risk. There was then a blacklist of communists and communist sympathizers in Hollywood that was drawn up. And film writers, actors, other people in the entertainment industry were on the list, and they would lose their jobs. Maybe some of you remember some years ago, there was this film called Trumbo, and it was about the scriptwriter Dalton Trumbo, who had won some Academy Awards for Best Picture. He was a very respected film writer. In fact, he did the film script for Exodus, the film about the founding of Israel. And he was one of the ones who was on this blacklist and lost his job. So there were then trials that heightened the whole climate of fear. And in the months before the Rosenberg trial, there was a trial of the Hollywood 10, one of them being Trumbo. There was the Smith Act trials of leaders of the Communist Party. And there was the prosecution of Alger Hiss, another famous case. Alger Hiss having been an important member of the State Department. And he had been active in the UN also. So in February 1950, there appeared on the scene Senator Joe McCarthy, and he launched his campaign against communists in government. He claimed there were hundreds of communists in the US government. And I got curious as I was thinking about this, and I looked up in the dictionary wondering what McCarthyism, how it would be defined now. I mean, I knew what it was like back in the 50s, and it was interesting. And I'll read you the definition from Merriam-Webster. They said that McCarthyism is a mid-20th century political attitude characterized chiefly by personal attacks on individuals by means of widely publicized, indiscriminate allegations, especially on the basis of unsubstantiated charges. That's just in a dictionary. That's the standard definition of McCarthyism. But of course, none of us thought of it that way then. We just thought about it being scary, and it was. Well, most prejudicial in terms of the Rosenbergs' position as standing trial at that moment was that in June 1950, just 1 month before the arrest of Julius, the Korean War began. And so the Rosenberg trial took place in the milieu of the Korean War. The trial opened in March 1951. The defendants were Julius, Ethel, and Morton Sobel. Sobel was a friend of Julius's from CCNY and also a engineering graduate. The principal prosecution witnesses were Ethel's younger brother, David Greenglass, David's wife, Ruth, and a third person who was not a member of the family, Harry Gold. Harry Gold was a Philadelphia chemist, and he had already confessed to working for the Russians and had already been sentenced to 30 years in prison when he came to testify at the Rosenberg trial. So I'm going to give you now a pared down, very pared down version of the prosecution's case as it unfolded at the trial. And I'm going to try not to get bogged down in details, which means it's going to be quite rough in general. So during World War II, David Greenglass, who was in his 20s at the time, and he was a machinist with only a high school education, was drafted. And entirely by chance, he was sent to Los Alamos, New Mexico, where the atom bomb was being developed. And he agreed to Julius and Ethel, Ethel being his sister, he agreed to their request that he supply information from Los Alamos that could be passed on to the Russians. So he wrote down whatever he was able to glean. Remember, this is the prosecution's case that I'm presenting. He wrote down whatever he was able to glean from his work at Los Alamos and in the machine shop there, and gave it to Julius and Ethel on 2 different occasions. One time when he was on furlough in New York, in their apartment, he gave them information. And he testified that Ethel had typed up some of his information, his notes. And then when Ruth, his wife, took the witness stand, she confirmed everything that he said. Now, David and Ruth also testified that on one occasion, they had given information in Albuquerque, New Mexico, to a man whom they now knew as Harry Gold. And Harry Gold and the Greenglasses told stories that meshed very well, tightly meshed stories. And the story they told was that Gold had come to the Greenglasses' apartment in Albuquerque on June 3rd, 1945. And he showed them a piece of a Jell-O box. This piece of a Jell-O box was the other half of a piece that Julius had given to Ruth Greenglass. And it was supposed to be an identification signal, a recognition device that would identify the person who came to the call for them for information as someone who had been sent by the Russians. And Gold showed his piece of the Jell-O box. Ruth had the second half of the piece, matching piece. And Gold said to them, "I come from Julius." And so David gave Gold information, and Gold gave David $500. The prosecutor said that Gold furnished the necessary link that tied the Rosenbergs to the Russians, because the assumption was that this piece of a Jell-O box Julius had given to the Russians, and it was then passed along. Well, the verdict, as you know, was guilty. Sobel was sentenced to 30 years. Sobel was not said to have had any connection at all with the atomic aspect of the case. And the Rosenbergs were sentenced to death. Greenglass's confession earned him a somewhat more lenient sentence. He got 15 years, and his wife was never indicted. Sobel was sent to Alcatraz, which was supposedly the prison for hardened criminals. And of course, he had never been in prison before. He was in his 30s. And the Rosenbergs were executed on June 19th, 1953. The Korean War ended 1 month after the executions. So the Rosenberg case and the Korean War were simultaneous. They were exactly matched in time. So in 1959, 6 years after the executions, my late husband, Walter Schneir, and I started working on a book on the Rosenberg case. And we had available to us at that very early date the trial record, the record of the appeals that the Rosenbergs had put out during their short time between their convictions and their deaths. And in addition, there were several items that Walter and I discovered while we were doing our research, things that were not previously known. So we worked on the book for 5 years, and that was well into the 60s by that time. The book was published in 1965. By that time, the political climate had changed quite considerably, and Senator McCarthy had died. McCarthyism was no longer in fashion. And when we studied the trial from this new vantage point of the 60s, it looked very different than it had looked in the 50s. And there were several aspects of the proceedings that were very troubling. And I want to just point out a few of the things that we saw in our book, Invitation to an Inquest, that we thought indicated that it had not been a fair trial. And I don't know, I can't see what you can see, but this is the cover of Invitation to an Inquest. This is a edition that came out in 1983. Yeah. The book was published in new editions several times as new information became available. New editions came out. So one of the first troubling things that I would mention about the case, and this is something that has always interested me in particular, is that the Rosenbergs were indicted under a statute known as the 1917 Espionage Act. This act is widely acknowledged to be outdated and vaguely worded and very detrimental to the execution of free speech. Because, well, it was used, for instance, in the Pentagon Papers to, I don't know if some people will remember the Pentagon Papers, which had to do with the Vietnam War. And
I think a lot of us.
yeah, okay. And it's a statute that currently awaits the possible return to the United States of Julian Assange or Edward Snowden, the whistleblowers. That would be the statute that they would be in. And in fact, I think Assange has already been indicted under that. Well, another troubling aspect, the Espionage Act of 1917, was done because in order to punish anyone who provided aid and comfort to the enemy in wartime. Well, the theft of the so-called theft of the atomic bomb was done in wartime, but it was not done on behalf of a wartime enemy. The Russians were our allies at the time that the information was allegedly given, which was quite different from the intention of the act. The defendants were not accused of being traitors, which would have required a higher level of proof. And they weren't even charged with espionage, but they were charged with conspiracy to commit espionage. So this was a particular accusation that gave the prosecution the opportunity to talk about the theft of the atomic bomb without having any obligation to actually prove that there had been an attempt to steal the atomic bomb secrets. Nevertheless, the prosecution was free to tell the jury that this was what had this was the aim of the conspiracy, and to insist that the conspiracy had been successful. That is, secrets of the bomb were stolen, but that they never had to prove that any acts were taken to do it. So therefore, the judge really imposed the sentence based on what was an unproved charge, since he based the sentence on the theft of the atomic secrets and the passage. So another troubling aspect of the case, the importance of the information Greenglass allegedly gave was greatly exaggerated. And before the trial, the government submitted a list of proposed witnesses. And on this list were famous scientists, including J. Robert Oppenheimer, George Kistiakowsky, Harold Urey, a Nobelist. But when the actual trial came about, none of these individuals was called. The person they chose to attest the importance of David's material was actually a man who had a bachelor degree in science and was a civilian employee of the Atomic Energy Commission. A second, my pages here are sticking. Okay. So the Rosenbergs were interrogated also about their political beliefs and activities, which was permitted by the judge. And because he said it was motivation for their crime, which is perhaps understandable. I guess it was motivation for the crime, but it was obviously deeply prejudicial in Cold War America. Then there was the information that we uncovered that was not known at the time of the trials. And that further undermined our confidence in the Gold Greenglass Albuquerque testimony in particular. First, we discovered that Gold did not independently recall the alleged password, "I come from Julius." What he originally said was, and then I gave a name. It was something like, "I come from Bob, I come from Harry." He didn't, the name Julius was introduced later on to him. Secondly, the Albuquerque Hilton hotel card was a piece of evidence that the prosecution introduced to corroborate the fact that Gold was actually in Albuquerque on June 3, 1945. But when we looked at that exhibit, we found it flawed in so many ways that we ultimately questioned its authenticity. Our final conclusion in Invitation to an Inquest was that the Rosenbergs were unjustly convicted and that the crime for which they were sentenced to die, the delivery of the secret of the atomic bomb to the Russians, had never occurred. I want to now come to the charge that the Rosenberg case was in evidence of anti-Semitism. My own opinion is that anti-communism was much more important than anti-Semitism in the case. That said, Jews were grossly overrepresented in that courtroom. All 4 defendants were Jewish. The main prosecution witnesses were all Jewish. The 2 U.S. attorneys who tried the case, 2 of the U.S. attorneys, both Irving Sapol, who was the main U.S. attorney, and his assistant, Roy Cohn, then 20 years old, his first appearance as an assistant U.S. attorney. And he was the main person who questioned David Greenglass. And the judge, Irving R. Kaufman, was Jewish. Yet in New York City with Many Jews, there was not a single Jew on the jury. So we don't really know what effect the Rosenbergs' religion had on the verdict. Now, I've said that anti-Semitism wasn't a significant aspect of the case, but I have to say that many Jews condemned the Rosenbergs. And this was particularly true of well-to-do, fully assimilated Jews who were active in public life, and they were eager to separate themselves from these Lower East Side radical types. Many of them wrote for Commentary magazine, which was founded by the American Jewish Committee. And Commentary ran several articles strongly supporting the verdict and the death sentences. And one article in particular, which was found particularly disgusting by a Holocaust historian, Lucy Davidovich, where she said that she advocated that the sentences should be carried out as soon as possible. So, and not to let excessive delays with appeals and things like that, because that would just increase the opportunity for propaganda, anti-Semitic propaganda to spread. Well, Walter and I remained involved with the Rosenberg case for many years after the publication of Invitation to an Inquest. And as I mentioned, we did do updates as new information became available. And there was a lot of information that became available in these past 7 decades, as you can imagine. In 1966, the year after the book came out, Sobel's attorneys made a new appeal on behalf of Sobel. And the appeal managed to release from the government something in one of Greenglass's sketches. It was called Exhibit 8. And this was said to be the main sketch. Roy Cohn described it as the sketch of the atom bomb itself. It was on a single sheet of paper. Well, the sketch had been kept secret. It had been talked about at the trial, but it had been put aside and not released publicly. But now that scientists had a chance to look at it and see it, they, like Philip Morrison, who was one of the scientists who worked at, physicists who worked at Los Alamos, said it was a caricature. And another scientist said of it, and I want to read what he said. He said, "It is not possible in any technologically useful way to condense the results of a $2 billion development effort into a diagram drawn by a high school graduate machinist on a single sheet of paper," which I think about sums up the situation. Well, then in the 1970s, we had the Freedom of Information Act, one of the byproducts of Watergate. And the information on the Rosenberg case, the FBI files on the case, were released basically as a result of lawsuits that were filed by the Rosenberg sons, who were now adults and wanted to know more about what had happened to their parents. A lot of interesting information came out with these files, which were heavily censored and were just released in bits and pieces. But one of the more shocking aspects of what we learned from the Freedom of Information documents was that the government knew that the evidence against Ethel was very weak, but that they wanted to give the death sentence anyway, because they thought it would act as a, quote, lever on Julius, where they could use the suffering of his wife and children to force him to confess and name names. And naming names was the nourishment of these committees and of the FBI investigations, because it would mean more investigations, more prosecutions. As you know, Julius did not break, and there were no follow-up investigation trials. On a personal note, Walter and I learned that FBI surveillance of our activities while we were writing the book was much more intensive than anything we could have possibly imagined. And later, after the book was published, the FBI did whatever they could to prevent us from promoting the book on TV, on radio, or in any other way. Then in the 80s, it was discovered that individuals whom the government had named as part of a Rosenberg spy ring, they were friends of Julius's, had left the United States back in the 50s at the time of the arrest, had gone to Czechoslovakia, and were at that point in the Soviet Union. In fact, had done very well there and had been like founders of the electronics industry in the Soviet Union. But anyway, that was interesting and upsetting. Then with the collapse of the Soviet Union, information began to leak out of Soviet files, and some former KGB agents began to come out and to come to the United States and talk about what they had done, and some of them talked about the Rosenberg. And we learned that at the time that Julius was fired from his job with the army, that the Russians had said, "You're a security risk. We can't use you anymore as an agent." And they had broken contact with him. Well, this was amazing, because the primary passage of information that was alleged between Greenglass and the Russians had occurred after February 1945, when Julius was no longer part of the Russian espionage, I don't know what to call it, the establishment
Network.
And so was he an espionage agent? Yes, he gave technological data. And that was also became clear in 1995 with the release of what was known as the Venona decrypts. And some of you know about the Venona documents. They were cables that were sent during the war between Russian agents in New York and the KGB base in Moscow. And the brilliant decryptors in Washington were able to figure out and decode some of these messages. And they mentioned someone who was clearly Julius Rosenberg. And it seems clear that he had given technical data from his job and had also recruited friends and associates who were doing technical work and were giving information to him that he would pass along to Russian agents. So,
Interesting. So Miriam, maybe you want to take a breath and so you can have a sip of water.
Yeah.
'Cause so you've now given us the picture that says Julius really was a spy.
Mhm.
Ethel wasn't. I guess one of the questions is how much important information did Julius really have that he was passing along as a machinist in New York City?
So he had, and it wasn't just him, it was, remember, some of his friends too, including Sobel, who later said when he was in his late 90s, he decided that he would confess and said yes, that he had been fighting it for all his life, but in his late 90s, he decided to admit the truth that he had been an agent and had given information from his work at, I think he worked for GE at the time, had to do with radar. So there was information, electronic information, and I won't say it was of no value. I'm not a technical person, so I can't tell you exactly, but there's been arguments over how valuable it was or was not. What I do know was that it was not atomic information, and that whatever Greenglass gave was very rudimentary and in fact had errors in it, we've since learned. So, but Julius was a gung-ho spy, yes. He was very dedicated to communism, and this was during World War II, remember, and he wanted to help the Russians.
Wow. There's one question in the chat, which is not directly related to Julius, but it's Linda. Linda, do you want to ask your question?
I was taken by your going to the dictionary for the definition of McCarthyism. And as you were reading it, I was sitting here and thinking about the past, I'm going to say 7, 8 years that we've had of the political discourse being very accusatory, and that there's a lot of disinformation, misinformation, and I can't repeat what McCarthyism is, but when I was listening to it, it sounded a lot like what some of the themes of our latest political discourse has been, even now. Not the communism part, but disparaging people's loyalty and patriotism. So the question I wrote was, do you think the term McCarthyism could be applied to the pattern of political discourse that we have currently?
Well, I do see parallels, between what happened then and what's happening now. And it's another period of great stress and conflict. And so you do see parallels. I mean, I don't know if we want to call it McCarthyism, which refers to that particular moment in history, but yes, there is a lot of similarity in the way people are attacked without any basis, and just an era of bad feeling. Yes.
That could actually lead to awful things happening to individuals in the same way it happened to Ethel. That people, I mean, when I was listening, okay, I'm sorry, I'm going on another tangent, but when I was watching the January 6th hearings, there was that mother and daughter who were just
right. I remember them too, that very touching incident where their lives were basically taken apart,
Right. Right. So I'm not saying McCarthyism, but the definition it felt like it had a lot of bearing.
Yeah.
So I just think we're all vulnerable to going, even though we say that's in the past, I think we're very vulnerable that these waves come through our
at moments of stress. I agree with you. I think it is very possible to return to that kind of thinking.
Yeah. And we saw it in the 60s too with the HUAC committee. Goes on and on. But let's move a little more to the Rosenbergs. So Sarita's question, I had the same question, particularly when you mentioned Roy Cohn as one of the prosecutors. Sarita's question is, How did the trial affect the careers of the prosecutors? I mean, we all know that Roy Cohn became infamous in his own right.
Yeah, well, I don't know whatever happened to Sapol. He was the lead. He was the lead assistant U.S. attorney, and he never went, beyond that. The judge was kind of interesting. I think Judge Kaufman always thought that he would get appointed to the Supreme Court, that he would join the Supreme Court. And there were some people who just were adamantly determined that he would never get to the court. And of course, he did not. And I think that was a great disappointment to him. The FBI, it went on. And it's kind of ironic to me now that the FBI is kind of the good guys in many respects. And when, Trump is attacking the FBI and, saying that they're against him and doing things to harm him and his followers. But of course, in the 50s, under Hoover, the FBI was a leading force of reaction in the country.
Absolutely. Hoover had his own little band of whatever.
Yep.
Bruce, did you have your hand up? Yeah. Unmute yourself, Bruce. Merry band. I think while we wait. I can't. Go ahead.
Okay. I was interested in our speaker's comments about some of the well-placed Jews who were basically, they joined the group of people who were against the Rosenbergs, and I guess were very happy to have found them guilty. But I also seem to recall from my memory, whether correctly or not, that either at that time or subsequent to it, there were a number of, maybe quite a few, well-placed individuals in the arts and show business, high visibility personalities who took exactly the opposite tack and lobbied in terms of just the opposite, that the Rosenbergs were falsely accused. Is my recollection here correct or not?
It's correct, but the timing is possibly not what you think it was, because at the time, before the Rosenberg executions, there was almost no one in this, country who believed in innocence. There were people who spoke out against the executions, and including some, I remember that there was a delegation of spiritual leaders, including Rabbi, who went to the president and said, commute their sentences. Actually, Pope Pius XII sent pleas for clemency. And in France and in many parts of Europe, in Latin America, in Australia, there were huge clemency demonstrations asking for the executions not to be carried out. And it was one reason that the executions were hurried forward at the 11th hour when they were supposed to, when there was a stay that Justice Douglas had asked for. And the Supreme Court had an emergency meeting, called the justices back from vacation, vacated the Douglas stay, set the execution date for a few days later. And then the Rosenbergs attorneys made a plea. They said, don't execute. It was set for 11 p.m. on June 19th, which was a Friday. And the plea was, don't execute them on the Sabbath. And so the government said, okay, and they moved it up to 8 o'clock and executed them just before sundown.
Thank
So,
you.
That's cruel.
yeah,
That is just, I mean, it's all cruel, but that just.
it seems to
Talk
be the
about-
last twist. Yeah.
Mhm. That feels a little anti-Semitic to me. But Carl had a question. Carl's question is, how did this incredible writing achievement, I mean, you put years of your life in it, you and your husband. And the question is, how did it affect your life?
Well, that's an interesting question, Carl. Well, of course, we did put years of our lives into it. And at a certain point, after Sobel was released from prison, Sobel was finally released. Trying to think of the year, I can't recall what year it was, but anyway, he served 18 years and he was finally released. And at that point, I thought, okay, well, now I can get a divorce from the Rosenberg case. You know, as long as he was in prison, I thought, this is, you know, I just have to keep on keeping on because he has got to get out of prison. And it turned out that I was only partly successful. I really wanted to be involved in the women's movement at that point. And I was able to do work in that field. Walter continued to be closely involved with working on the Rosenberg case. And his posthumous book was on the Rosenberg case, Final Verdict. And he tells in that his final conclusions on what really happened. And I think he was right that he did know what really happened, did figure it out. But yeah, it was a long slog. And once I was in it up to my neck, I really could not get out of it. As tonight proves, here I am still talking about it.
Yeah, it's either a passion or an obsession. So, but we'll.
Well, it's not an obsession and it's not a passion. It's a responsibility, I would say.
I love that. I love that. We have time for another question. We have a minute or so left. Anybody else? Yeah, Bruce, keep going.
I would like to, or I'm curious, I should say, where are the Rosenberg children today, assuming they're alive?
Okay, they are alive. They've had very successful lives, I'm happy to say. They were adopted by a family that cared for them, gave them their name. Their name is now Mirapole. And actually their adoptive father is the person who wrote the song Strange Fruit, if you know it, that wonderful anti-lynching song. And the younger one, Robert, became an attorney. And what I find a rather moving thing, founded an organization called the Rosenberg Fund for Children, which gives grants to the children of political activists who've been imprisoned. And Michael became an economist, taught at a college in Massachusetts, and is now retired.
It's great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Miriam, for spending the time with us and taking us on a little journey of history, because this is not
You're
only
welcome.
about the Rosenbergs, it's about the different cultural periods that we went through. And
Right.
as a CCNY graduate, I can tell you, we were called the Little Red Schoolhouse. So
Yeah,
Oh, really?
yeah.
absolutely, absolutely.
I
So we
never
took
heard that
to
before.
heart.
That's good.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Who's saying that?
Rita.
Who's
Rita.
Oh, Rita.
Eric went to CCNY.
Right. Now, he was an engineering student there, wasn't he?
Yes.
Yes.
And
He and I
after-
used to talk about that.
Okay, so then I assume he told you why he transferred out of their engineering school. It was because CCNY was considered the red schoolhouse. And he thought he would never, ever get a job.
Right.
Right, right. So my husband and I, he's somewhere over there, we wear that badge proudly. So thank you. It was a
You're
great.
very welcome. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you.
So let me
Yes.
just tell you all what's coming down the road. Our next speaker, we're going to change the tone a little bit. We're going from the Communist Party to a discussion of God, although it's a little different discussion. This is March 14th, and our speaker is Liana Fink, and she's a cartoonist for the New Yorker magazine. And Liana has written an illustrated novel, and it's called, I want to make sure I get this right, Let There Be Light, the real story of her creation. So Liana will be talking about her book, and Liana is the daughter of the Finks. They're members of Shomrei, and so she will be joining us. And so we will talk about, so where did Miriam go? Miriam, you are certainly welcome to join us, because this is going to, I think, be a little feminist look at God. So please join us. I'm sure Rita will give you the link.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so I look forward to seeing you all again on. Oh,
David's got
did you
his
want to say
hand up.
something?
Yeah, I just want to, inform everybody that I believe this is correct, that my wife at CCNY actually occupied a building.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I did occupy a city college building. Yeah. Thank you for that. So in any event, those were the other days in the 60s. I really do look forward to seeing everybody on March 14th, and we will have a feminist view of God in pictures. So
Sounds interesting.
see you then. Everybody
you.
be well. Take care. Thank
you.
you.
Bye.
Thanks again, Miriam. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.